There was a small house at the foot of the St. Francis Dam in San Francisquito Canyon, about 40 miles northwest of downtown Los Angeles. The dam keeper lived in it. His name was Tony Harnischfeger, and that night, the house sat directly below 200 feet of concrete and 12 billion gallons of water. At about 3 minutes to midnight on March 12, 1928, the dam let go. The house was the first thing the water reached. Harnischfeger's body was never found. His companion, Leona Johnson, was found later, wedged between 2 blocks of concrete near the broken base. His 6-year-old son was found further down the canyon. 14 hours earlier, the man who built the dam had stood at that same spot, looked at a leak, and said it was safe. William Mulholland ran the Los Angeles Bureau of Waterworks and Supply. He had come to the city as a young man, taught himself engineering out of books and fieldwork, and built the aqueduct that brought water 233 miles from the Owens Valley and made the modern city possible. By the 1920s, he was the most trusted engineer in Southern California. He had never had a major failure. When Los Angeles needed a reservoir to hold a year of water against drought and against the ranchers up the Owens Valley who kept dynamiting the aqueduct, Mulholland chose San Francisquito Canyon, and he designed the dam himself. There was no independent review. There was no state agency that reviewed dams. In 1928 in California, if William Mulholland said a dam was sound, that was the review. His record was the guarantee. That is the part to hold on to. Nothing about the way this dam was approved was unusual for its time. One man's judgment built it, because one man's judgment was all the system asked for. The St. Francis was a concrete gravity dam. The principle is simple. The wall holds the water back by sheer weight, and the wider the base, the more weight there is to resist the push. The design depends on the base being sized for the height. The dam went up between 1924 and 1926. While it was rising, the plan changed. To store more water, Mulholland raised the height of the dam by 10 feet. Then, partway through, he raised it another 10 feet. The base was not widened to match. The dam ended up about 195 feet tall, holding a reservoir enlarged twice over, on a foundation footprint sized for a shorter wall. Sources differ on the exact final numbers, and the parapet adds some confusion, but the core fact is not in dispute. The dam got taller. The base did not get wider. Then there was the ground it stood on. The west side of the canyon was a reddish conglomerate that softened and crumbled when it got wet. The east side was a schist, and built into that east hillside, though nobody in 1928 had the tools to see it clearly, was the scar of an ancient landslide. The reservoir began filling in 1926. For 2 years, the water rose behind the dam, and the rock on both abutments sat in that water, and got wet, and stayed wet. A concrete dam leaks. Every engineer expects some seepage, and the St. Francis had leaked before. New cracks had appeared over the 2 years of filling, and each time they had been looked at and judged normal for a dam settling under load. On the morning of March 12, 1928, Tony Harnischfeger found a new leak on the west side. The water coming out of it was muddy. Muddy water is the sign an engineer does not want. Clear seepage is water finding a path through the concrete. Muddy water can mean the water is carrying the foundation out with it, dissolving the ground the dam stands on, 1 grain at a time. Harnischfeger was worried enough to send word. Mulholland came out himself, with his assistant Harvey Van Norman. They spent about 2 hours at the dam. They traced the muddy leak and found that at the point where the water actually left the rock, it ran clear. The mud, they decided, was coming from a road being cut nearby, washing into the flow further down. By that reasoning, the dam was doing what dams do. Mulholland pronounced it safe and drove back to the city. He was, by every account, entirely sincere. He had looked at the evidence in front of him and read it the way his 40 years told him to read it. That was the last inspection. It ended around noon. The dam had a little under 12 hours left. There's no reliable witness to the failure itself. The people closest to the dam died in the first seconds, and the power went out across the canyon at 11:57 when the water tore out the transmission lines. That timestamp, a stopped clock in the electrical record, is how we know when it began. What the morning showed is that the dam came apart almost completely. The 2 side sections broke into pieces, some the size of houses, and were carried down the canyon. Blocks weighing thousands of tons were found half a mile downstream. The center section stayed standing. A single tall wedge of concrete, alone in the empty canyon, with the reservoir gone and the walls torn open on both sides of it. The newspapers called it the tombstone. Below it, the water was already moving. A mile and a half down the canyon stood Powerhouse Number 2, with its workers and their families asleep in company cottages beside it. The wave, still close to its full height, reached them within minutes. 64 people at that powerhouse died where they slept. Only a handful of those who had been there lived. The wave that left the canyon was, by the estimates that survived, somewhere between 8 and 14 stories high. Then it turned west, into the valley of the Santa Clara River, where the towns were. The dam was gone within minutes. The deweying took 5.5 hours, because that is how long the water needed to cross the valley. It had 54 miles to travel to reach the ocean, and almost everyone in its path was asleep. At Castaic Junction, the flood crossed the highway and took the construction camps along the river, where crews building the road were bunked for the night. It took a stretch of farmland worked by families who lived close to the fields. Many of the dead here were migrant laborers, counted loosely if at all, and this is where the true toll begins to blur. The water reached Santa Paula around 1:30 in the morning. Ahead of it, in the dark, a few men were riding. An Edison patrolman at the Saugus substation, nearly caught by the water himself, got out the first alarm. In Santa Paula, a motorcycle officer named Thornton Edwards and others rode ahead of the flood through the streets, banging on doors, waking people and sending them to high ground. They are remembered locally as the Paul Reveres of the valley. They did not save everyone. They saved a great many. Where the warning arrived, people lived. Where it did not, they did not. A family that got the knock and ran uphill in their night clothes survived. A family half a mile away that slept through it did not. The difference, over and over that night, was a few minutes, and whether someone reached your door. By the time the flood passed Santa Paula, the wave was lower, spread wider, full of wreckage. It was mud and trees and houses and railway track and animals and people, moving as one mass. It was still, at the coast, carrying bodies out past the surf. It reached the Pacific near Ventura at about 5:30 in the morning, 54 miles from a canyon most of the drowned had never seen. Some of the bodies it carried out were recovered from the ocean and from beaches down the coast for weeks. Some were found in silt and riverbank for years. A set of remains was identified as a St. Francis victim as late as the 1990s. The number of dead is not settled, and it never will be. The count made in 1928 came to somewhere around 385 confirmed. Later identifications pushed the confirmed figure to at least 431, which is the number the memorial now carries. The real figure is higher than any of these, and the reason is in the valley itself. The flood ran through farm country full of seasonal workers, many of them Mexican laborers living in camps by the fields, whose names were on no payroll and no census. Whole families in those camps were taken, and there was no list to check them against. When people cannot be counted before they die, they cannot be counted after. So the honest statement is a range. At least 431 people died. The true number is probably closer to 450 and maybe more. The uncertainty is not a gap in the research. It is a fact about who was standing in the water. The coroner's inquest opened within days. Over 2 weeks it heard engineers, geologists, and survivors, and it examined the abutments and the concrete and the record of the leaks. William Mulholland took the stand. He did not deflect. He told the jury that if there was an error of human judgment, he was the human, and that he would not try to fasten it on anyone else. Asked how he felt, he said the only people he envied in the whole affair were the dead. The jury did not recommend that he be prosecuted. It found the failure was caused by the defective foundation, and it placed the responsibility with the Bureau of Waterworks and Supply and with the man who ran it. And it wrote one sentence that outlived everyone in the room. The construction of a municipal dam, it said, should never be left to the sole judgment of one man, no matter how eminent. He was 72. He retired that year. He lived until 1935, mostly out of public view. The people who knew him said the dam was in the room with him for the rest of his life. For decades, the accepted cause was the west abutment, the reddish rock that softened in water. That was the 1928 view, and it is not wrong so much as incomplete. Beginning in the 1990s, the engineering geologist J. David Rogers went back over the site with tools the original commission never had. His reconstruction puts the start of the failure on the east side in that ancient landslide built into the hillside. 2 years of reservoir water had soaked into it. On the night of March 12th, the old slide moved again, and it took the east end of the dam with it, and once one end was gone, the rest could not hold. The debate is not fully closed, and reasonable specialists still weigh the two abutments differently. But the leading modern view is that the dam was keyed into a landslide that was there before the canyon had a name, and that no amount of good concrete would have saved a dam anchored to it, which is the whole matter in one line. The warning signs that a person could read, the muddy leak, the cracks, the height raised without the base to carry it, were read and dismissed. The warning sign nobody could read, the landslide under the east end, was the one that mattered most. Both were there. Both were in the ground before the water ever rose. The failure did change one thing, flatly and for good. Within a year, California passed the law that put dam safety under state review and ended the era when one man's word was enough. Every non-federal dam in the state has been reviewed by someone other than its builder ever since. Tony Harnisch-Fager saw the muddy water first and reported it and was told it was nothing. He went back to the house at the foot of the dam because that was where he lived, and the house was where the water started. The tombstone stood in the canyon for 2 years after the flood. People drove out to see it and climbed it, and one of them fell and died, so the city sent a crew to break it up and haul it away. There's nothing at the dam site now that looks like a dam. The pieces are in the brush, and the canyon is quiet, and the river runs where it always did. The record is complete enough to say what happened. The dam was raised without widening its base. It was built into ground that could not hold it. The last man who could have doubted it did not, and 431 people, at least, were asleep downstream. The verdict is in the title. The facts were in the canyon the whole time. There is another one on screen about the aqueduct that made the reservoir necessary, and the valley it emptied to fill it,